want to know the attributes of top performers according to analysis of $54 billion in revenue? Then keep listening. Today, I sit down with Guy Rubin, founder and CEO of Ebsta, and the person behind the 2024 B2B Sales Benchmarking Report. After analysing 4.2 million opportunities, 1 million hours of conversations from 530 companies representing over 54 billion in revenue, they have the answers to what make an A player. We unpack the state of sales before looking into the 5 key attributes for success: pipeline generation, qualification, objection handling, relationship management, and deal management. So if you're an IC or sales leader, I'm confident you'll get value from this discussion with Guy, as he gives so many actionable pieces of advice, making this one of the most valuable episodes we've done. Let's get into it. Hi everyone, welcome to the next episode of Sales Unfiltered. Today I am joined by CEO and founder of Ebsta, Guy Rubin, to talk about what top performers do differently from their B2B sales report that you launched this year. I think to really understand why you launched this B2B sales benchmarking report, it's important for us to understand who you are and the work that you do at Ebsta, because it all interlinks. So would you love to give our audience and listeners a bit of an introduction if they haven't heard about you already?
Sure. Well, first of all, a huge fan of the podcast, and thank you for having me.
Great to meet a fan.
There we go.
Thank you.
So my name is Guy Rubin. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Ebsta. We present Ebsta as a revenue intelligence platform, and really an AI-first revenue intelligence platform. And there's a couple of things that underpin our proposition. So we help businesses understand, one of the things we found in the last year or so is that businesses have invested lots of money and energy in all these different point solutions for their front office. And so we're spending all of this money for our sales teams to help them to try and be more productive. And we're still finding that 4 out of 5 reps are missing quota. And that's just not sustainable, right? We need more of our sales team to be hitting quota. And the problem's a lot worse than that. The delta between the top performers in our businesses and the average performers has gone from 4x a couple of years ago. It was 6x a year ago.
Wow.
And at the beginning of this year, it was nearly 9x. So we're in a situation where these top performers are now in a place where they can almost hold the business to ransom because they're outperforming the rest of the sales team by such a great margin.
Yeah.
So we've been on a mission to try and understand what those top performers are doing at every stage of the sales cycle, and using that information to try and prompt the B and C players to basically help them raise their game. Because ultimately everybody still wants to win, even the B and C players. The problem is they don't necessarily understand how to win. So we undertook this latest benchmark report to really get under the skin of what those top performers are doing at every stage of the sales cycle, and using that information to really prompt the B and C players onto their journey. So that's what we do.
Guy, you said you're a fan of our podcast. I'm a fan of the work that you're doing. We always want to try and encourage high performance within the work that we do with our communities and this channel as well. So to really unpack not just the state of sales, but actually what those performers are doing differently is just so game changing. And reading the report, if you haven't already, it will be in the show notes. Please do download it because it was really insightful, and we're going to go through a bit more of the depths to each attribute in this conversation. But to touch on that point there that you mentioned with B and C players and to make them rise up to A players, do you think as a business it's important to have B and C players, or do you think that businesses and leaders should only be hiring those A players?
So last year we saw a huge amount of churn in reps. That 36% of AEs were actually churned last year, which is a huge stat. So it's worth understanding. The report represents mostly Ebsta client base, plus a lot of the pavilion community as well. So there's over 530 companies data that's been analysed through this, all the fast-growing B2B businesses. So the challenge, my personal view is that this idea that we're going to churn our B and C players and then hire a load more and they're all going to be A stars it's just unrealistic. And so what we need to do is invest a lot more time and energy in helping those B and C players raise their game.
Right.
And my perspective is that salespeople have got a very limited capacity for learning, and the problem that we have is that we are using that limited capacity for learning to teach them things that the AI can do for them. Okay, and so whether it's populating Salesforce with all of our activity and contacts we're engaging with, or if you're going through a qualification methodology like a Medic or a MEDPIC or BANT or Spiced, you don't need, the AI can do the hard work in taking the responses on a call recording, for example, and using it to pre-populate in Salesforce how well the customer's been qualified. And so what we've seen is that the B and C players, you can teach them in a classroom how to use a qualification methodology like a Medic. But 3 months later, none of them are using it if they're also responsible for the admin around it.
I see.
Okay, but if you teach them how to do it and they get a micro reward if they qualify the customer well enough, like a green thumbs up if they qualify the customer well enough, and a red thumbs down if they haven't, all of a sudden it's now gamified. And the reps only get 1 or 2 red thumbs down before they decide to change the way they do their qualification, because they're all aiming for that green thumbs up.
Is that something that you do at Ebsta?
That's part of what we do. We deliver that kind of that extraction from the call recording, populate the medic, and then give them that green thumbs up at the end of the qualification. So they know they've done enough to qualify the customer and leave discovery and move on to the next steps.
Do you do anything where you incentivize the amount of green thumbs up that they get?
Well,
apart from commission?
We encourage the customers to actually, what we found, this generation of salespeople, I had an interesting debate recently with Jacko, and who runs Winning by Design. Yeah. And there's a real kind of, I suppose there's a perspective out there that suggests that this generation of salespeople aren't hungry enough. They aren't committed to the cause. They don't want to sell. They don't want to win as much. I don't believe that. I just think we're not necessarily talking the same language as this generation of salespeople. And what this generation are expecting are those micro rewards. They want the certificate. They want the badge to say they've qualified or they've come past the next step. And I think what we need to do as leadership is use that limited capacity for learning to teach them how to deal with objection handling, to teach them how to do business case building, instead of teaching them how to do their admin, which the AI does a much better job at doing anyway.
Yeah. I mean, we're 5 minutes into the conversation and we've already started talking about AI. That is, I think it's a huge topic that when you're talking about high performance, you have to use it in a smart way. But obviously there's this fear that AI is going to take over sales roles. I know you're really passionate about AI is not ever going to be a salesperson. It is just taking away those mundane jobs that make them focus on performance and being efficient and effective. But how would you advise people, whether you're a rep or you're a leader listening to this, to use AI in a really, really effective way so that it's not taking over what the salesperson can do so fantastically?
No, it's a great question. What do we know? We know that in B2B sales, even in 2024, relationships drive revenue. Okay, and so what the AI should be there for is taking away anything from the rep that distracts them from building those strong relationships with our customers and prospects. And so, for example, the top performers we found are twice as likely to self-source their own opportunities from the relationships they're building in the market. So one of the things we do for customers when we onboard them is go through their last year's worth of email traffic and calendar events and try and build a definitive people graph of all of the relationships the business holds, because it's not unusual to find 2/3 of the relationships never make it into Salesforce. So one of the things we try and do is understand how many relationships everyone is building, both in a sales process with existing customers, but also earlier than that, so at top of the funnel. And again, what we find is that the top performers are the ones building the most relationships with people perhaps they can't even sell to for the next 12 months. So building up those relationships is absolutely core, and what we need to be doing is teaching our salespeople how to evolve and improve those relationships. One of the consistent data points that we deliver that's unique to us is our engagement score. So we measure engagement, we measure the relationship strength, and we always score it out of 100. So what's fascinating is that we even in 2024, what we know is that relationships drive revenue in our marketplace. And what we need to do is minimize the distraction on anything that the AI can do better than the salespeople.
Right.
Okay, because what the AI can't do is build relationships with our customers, build trust with our customers, and help them to buy. What the AI can do, and does much better than the sales team does, is things like logging their activity, creating contacts, keeping Salesforce clean and up to date, and also taking extractions from things like call recordings and populating your medic in Salesforce, or identifying all the objections the customer raised on the call, so that everyone has all the information they need available to them. Yeah. And that's kind of where we are. So in a world where salespeople have got a very limited capacity for learning, we need to double down and invest our time in teaching them on how to deal with those objections and how to build business cases and how to come across to our customers as expert advisors. Yeah. So one of the things I mentioned earlier, we measure engagement as part of our proposition. So we measure the relationship strength between the salesperson and anyone else in the business and our prospects and all the stakeholders during the sales cycle. So if you've got a buying committee of 9 stakeholders, knowing how big that buying committee is and which personas we really need to lean into and build strong relationships with based on the deals that we've closed in the past is a great way of understanding how well this deal is likely to close. Now, when we look at the data, what we find is that the B and C players are trying to build the same number of relationships and engage with those people as much as the top performers are. So why are the top performers achieving much, much more engagement with their prospects and customers? The answer is because the prospects are seeing them as expert advisors. Okay, so if you're trying to buy, I don't know, HR technology, okay, well, the chances are the person you're selling to might not be an HR guru, okay, but they know they've been told by the board they need to implement something.
Yeah.
Okay, well, as an expert advisor, I know that that individual's probably got 7 other projects on right now. And what I need to find out is this HR project, you know, how high a priority is it? And at the end of the discovery call, we should be at a point where, as a logical human being talking to another logical human being, we should be able to reach a consensus as to whether this is a project that's high enough priority that we should be investing time on both sides of the journey to actually reach a conclusion or not.
Yeah.
Right? And if the answer is not right now, that's fine. And we find that top performers are closing 30% of their opportunities off as lost at the discovery stage.
And no is good.
No is great, right?
Yeah.
None of us are going to win all of our opportunities.
Yeah,
you know,
but you need to know it as early as possible so you don't waste time.
Absolutely. And one of the data points I lean into a lot is the level of coverage each rep needs to hit quota. And that variable can be very wide. So as a top performer, I might not need as much coverage as if I'm a B or C player. And so beating up the top performers because they haven't got enough coverage, or perhaps congratulating a B and C player because they've got a huge amount of coverage, it doesn't necessarily mean we're going to hit which one's going to hit quota.
Yeah.
Right.
I love that point that you mentioned earlier about the relationship management as well, and making sure that you're building relationships with people that might not even buy right now, because that's so important. That often people are just thinking about this quarter, they're living in the moment. And I've had discussions with so many different sales leaders and reps on this channel, and one of the really interesting things that I learned is, like, stop focusing in what's happening right now, always be working ahead and thinking 3 quarters out, because you might be building a relationship with somebody that might buy in a few years' time, but how amazing to foster that relationship now, and then they will come back to you, and to that point, being seen as an expert. Buyers do not take a qualification on buying software. Like, nobody actually really knows how to buy, so they are leaning on that salesperson to educate the buyer, because it's not really in their job description that you're going to be a software buyer, does it?
Absolutely, yeah. And you can see it, and we see it in the calls. So one of the things we used to we used to migrate people's call recordings from other systems. You might be using a Gong or Zoom or Teams, and we're able to, in the same way we migrate the last year's worth of email traffic and calendar events, trying to find all those missing relationships, we can also analyse all the discovery calls you've done for the last year as well, and show you that, look, that deal that closed lost eventually, it looks like we never actually qualified them correctly in the first place. So understanding where we're dropping the ball during that sales cycle in the past, or what's gone well in the past, allows us to build these benchmarks.
Yeah.
And we can use those benchmarks to prompt the B and C players as to what they need to do to win more.
And speaking about benchmarks, Guy, from this report, what are the 5 key attributes that you found that separate those average performers to top performers?
Well, I suppose the easiest way of thinking about it is kind of working through the cycle, the funnel. So top of the funnel, as I mentioned, the top performers are twice as likely to self-source. Then when we get to qualification, the top performers are closing 30% of their opportunities off as lost at that discovery stage, while the B and C players are holding on to pipeline even though it's not real. Then as we start thinking about the sales process itself, the top performers will identify the entire buying committee. So if you're only engaged with 3 stakeholders in your sales process, but there are 9 stakeholders in the buying committee, the chances are your competitors are talking to the other 6, right? So even if they're going to be a detractor, we need to identify who they are. So which are the personas that we need to engage with? Who are our buying committee? And then what's most important is how much momentum or engagement is required with each of them at each stage of the sales cycle. There'll be certain personas that are really important at the beginning of the sales process, but we don't need them further on, and others the opposite way around. And so, for example, one of the things we saw in the last 12 months is that the CFO is becoming more and more prominent. So, it can be perceived by certainly a lot of the kind of more junior salespeople, the CFO can be a bit of a scary resource to kind of, so let's stay away from them. But in reality, if they're part of the buying committee and you're not engaging with them, the chances are they're going to be a detractor. So we need to lean in, and the earlier you can engage with the CFO, the much more likely you are to get that deal over the line, because ultimately they want the same return on investment as everybody else.
Why do you think people are scared to bring the CFO in?
I think historically the CFO and finance has been this kind of separated out from the rest of the business. I suppose it depends what you're selling as well. But if you're not selling specifically to a CFO, more often than not they've been kind of left aside, and that there's an assumption that your economic buyer actually has a budget already. But in today's world, the CFO is more and more involved in that buying decision. And so helping them understand why this is a priority and why they should make budget available for this over and above other projects that are going on right now is going to help the CFO to be on board, because ultimately they will be part of that sign-off process.
Yeah, it's almost that fear of I just leave them there in the corner until
if I ignore them, maybe they'll go away.
Exactly, but it's like, well, then unfortunately it's going to get down to the end of the sales cycle and you're like, should have brought them in earlier. Right, so from those 5 key points, which is the pipeline generation, qualification, objection handling, relationship management, and deal management, going into the pipeline generation, you mentioned self-source pipeline is the most effective. Would you say that there's a difference between the inbound, the outbound, maybe partner referral? What method have you seen
there's
as the
a piece
best?
on this in the report. So I wouldn't necessarily say self-source is the most effective, but it's certainly something we see consistently within those top performers, self-sourcing twice as likely to self-source their own opportunities. And building up their own persona in the market is absolutely key. The single source we found to be the most productive when it comes to conversion rates has been through partner channels.
Interesting.
The challenge with partner channels is they're not easy to set up, right? So I know for personally, our partner channel, I don't think we generated $1 of revenue from our partners for 18 months. And now it represents over 1/3 of our revenue. So working out...
It's a slow burn, isn't it?
Takes a long time to work out what you're going to do. So more often than not, if you're an ancillary service or product to a core partner, the chances of them promoting it to their customers is relatively slim. But if you're a core component of what they do, if they can't sell their solution without you being part of it, or at least if you are part of it, it's a much easier sell for them, or much more likely to win the deal or get the customer to stay for a much longer time, then all of a sudden you become important to the partner.
Right.
And so working out how you can be important to your partner is really important. And again, in our world, our partners are expert advisors, they're change agents. So we solve the problem around, from our perspective, you can't be data-driven if you haven't got the data. So the first thing we do that's different to our peers, our competitors, is that we fix all that historical dirty data in Salesforce. And so by understanding how, you might have opportunities with one contact associated to them in Salesforce, but actually when we look back historically through the mailboxes and calendars, it turns out that you actually did engage with 9 stakeholders during that sales cycle. So knowing that and putting it back into the system of record, along with all the activity and how much momentum was required with different stakeholders, if you start doing that for thousands of deals or hundreds of deals that have happened over the last 12 months, suddenly you're now in a place where you start to see the patterns, and we understand now what good looks like.
Yeah.
So again, the AI can do all of that heavy lifting for you. It can do all the fixing all that historical data and put an engine in place that keeps Salesforce clean and up to date over time, moving forward without the reps having that responsibility. So for us, fixing the data was key, and then converting that data into insights is really important. But I can give you all the insights in the world as to how you can win more, but if you don't have a change agent within your business, you're not going to win. So some businesses have got internal RevOps teams that are really good, but more often than not, those change agents are external consultants. And so we now go to market with those external consultants.
Yeah.
And from their perspective, they can't affect change within those organizations if they don't have the data and the insights. So it's a beautiful synergy.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how we found partnerships for us. So I'd encourage your watchers and listeners to think about how can you enhance the partners that you're looking for. Are they service providers? Are they other software vendors? And how do you bring those two together? How does 1 and 1 equal more than 2?
Yeah. And talking about bringing things together, one of the hot topics at the moment is ABM and ABS and how you can bring sales and marketing together. Did you see any of this in your report of how people can maybe build those account-based strategies instead of just working off their defined ICP?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of work going on now to have one go-to-market motion. I don't think there is a clear line now between sales and marketing. We've seen lots of different kind of approaches with pods and SDRs and BDRs now reporting to marketing and then sales and so on. So, but what we're seeing is the closer those two functions work closer together, the more chance of winning. And there's usually a real gap between what marketing thinks is success. In other words, we've got X number of leads that came into the business, or Y number of MQLs, and the sales team going, I haven't got enough leads coming in. They're not good enough quality. So finding out ways, and what I'd think about here is incentives drive behaviour. So working out ways of aligning the incentives across those teams is really important.
How do you align them? Because that's really hard. I mean, that's probably a whole other episode, but it is a really tricky one of how you incentivize marketing, but also sales. And there's no blurred line when you're talking about who goes after what account, and how you also take that customer on a journey so that it's not feeling like you are working against each other, you're collaborating.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting here is that what's slightly counterintuitive is the larger your TAM, the bigger the problem. So if you've got a very small market, there's only 150 companies you're ever going to go and sell to. It's quite easy to align the messaging and to get everyone working towards a common goal.
Yeah.
If there's 500,000 businesses that can buy what you're selling, then actually it can be very difficult, because marketing's starting to market to the wrong ICP, and sales don't agree with the leads that are coming through and so on. So that can be a real challenge. And again, just aligning the incentives is really important, I think. And so finding ways to incentivize all of the team towards a common goal, and allowing people to kind of work together on that has been important. In our organisation, I found that, just on a personal note, every time I step in the room, suddenly the CEO's in the room. And so then instead of it being, right, how do we work together to achieve a common goal, it's right now, what does the CEO want me to say? And so I've stepped back from the kind of senior leadership team, and I'm still involved, but they work collaboratively when I'm not in the room to address the common challenges. And as long as it's all customer centric, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Really interesting. I think that alignment piece is key when you're talking about anything around building those relationships. And with the next stage being qualification, which is your second key factor. I love this quote that you put in the report, saying qualification for top performers is not just a checkbox exercise. You've mentioned already different sales methodologies that people use for qualification. Did you see, because I know you mentioned Medic and Spiced in there, but do you have a preference, or do you feel all methodologies have their own strengths? Anyone that you saw pip the other?
So the short answer is, we've done, of all the analysis we've done, we didn't see a material delta, but depending on what methodology people are using. The general rule of thumb is try and keep it as simple as you possibly can.
Right.
But as long as you're doing as long as you've got a consistent approach to qualification, then now you're at the races, because you can start to work and evolve and improve the sales process and tighten up the ICP that you're targeting by understanding how people are responding to different types of questions. And it's not just about the ICP is not just types of businesses you're trying to sell to or size of businesses. It's also which personas we should be engaging with. And that journey doesn't stop at the discovery stage. Okay, the discovery continues during the entire sales cycle, because things change. So for example, we saw that the top performers are much more likely to evolve what solution they're recommending to the customer during the sales cycle, while the B and C players will just be a robot. So I came to sell you X, and at the end of it I'm going to sell you X, and if you don't want to buy X, then we're not for you. So the A stars are much more likely to kind of evolve the proposition and make it work for the customer, and again, in that partnership, help them to buy.
Yeah.
Rather than just sell at them.
Because there's probably so much blank space that they're not uncovering, and that they can actually use your product a lot more than just this one area. And then it will help the account managers when upselling and really getting all of that information. And this qualification stage is so crucial to really understand exactly what they're wanting, so that hopefully you're not finding out all of the blockers that might be there down the line. What would you say are some of the questions that reps should be asking to make sure that they're qualifying properly?
Well, look, it's the usual stuff, right? We need to understand who the economic buyers are. We need to understand who the key influencers are. What's the buying committee? What's the agenda? What, is there a critical event?
Yeah.
Is probably one of the most important ones. Okay, so yeah, there's a lot of people out there potentially window shopping. One of the interesting stats that we came up with was around slippage. So slippage, 12 months ago, nearly a third of deals were slipping. At the beginning of this year, it was nearly half.
Wow.
Okay, so slippage is considered, once you pass discovery and you've got an anticipated close date, anything that slips past that was considered slippage. And the impact of slippage on win rates is material. And so what happened at the end of last year, the beginning of this year, the first quarter of this year, we saw was actually a slightly counterproductive kind of outcome. We saw more pipeline being generated than ever before, but win rates weren't going up. or number of closed deals wasn't going up. Okay, and so what was actually happening was there was a lot of window shopping going on. There's a lot of people kind of telling you that they're in a sales process, but in reality, more often than not, they were either kicking the tires, or maybe they were trying to get their incumbent supplier to reduce their price. They were trying to get you to give them a quote as well. And so because we weren't qualifying them well enough, and we're desperate for the revenue because we'd underperformed in the previous quarters, we're just following these leads down the line and down a path that's ultimately never going to close. And so we saw pipeline generation go up, and then slippage increased by nearly 50%. And then the number of deals won didn't change. Right, so we need to get a lot more ruthless in the way that we qualify these customers. And if you're not closing 30% of your opportunities off at the discovery stage, you're not closing off enough of them.
Wow, yeah, no, that's really important to hear. And the next point, I think that leads so nicely into objection handling, because you mentioned that top performers are 843% more likely to overcome objections, which is just a crazy stat. And I know that timing, and you've mentioned this, and making sure that you're getting it at the right time, but how important is timing when handling those objections?
So what we saw, for the very first time this year, we analysed over 1 million hours of sales calls.
Wow.
Okay, so what was fascinating is looking at how the top performers are dealing with objections and versus the average performers. So when we look at why deals are closed lost, the average performers are, more often than not, they're putting things in that, like, no defined budget for this product. Well, the reality is, the unfortunate reality is, most of us live in a world where there is no budget for what we're selling.
Yeah.
Okay, and so that's not a valid reason for closing the deals off as lost. What the top performers are doing is they're really trying to get under the skin of whether we can deliver the ROI the customer's looking for. Now, if the answer is no, let's understand it sooner rather than later. And so the top performers are much better at having that conversation around ROI and what objections are likely to be raised during the sales process much earlier in the sales cycle, in that discovery phase. So the B and C players are busy showing buttons and how features work and talking about price in those discovery meetings, while the top performers are talking much more about ROI. And trying to get under the skin of what those objections are likely to be, and is this really a priority? Because I'm sure you've got 7 other projects on right now, so what do they look like? And how important are those projects? Because they sound pretty, the takeaway is a great, powerful sales tool. I don't think you're ready for us right now.
Yeah.
But let's understand what other projects you've got on, what other priorities you've got, and when the timeline's going to be right for us to have another conversation.
So they're basically building a business plan with the buyer.
Exactly that, and they're coming across as a peer. They're coming across as that expert advisor in their niche space, and they're coming across that your time is valuable, so is mine. I want to invest the time in going through a sales cycle with you and helping you to buy and helping you solve this specific problem that we've identified. But before we go down this journey, let's work out whether this is really the right time for this, right? And who are the stakeholders and the blockers that are going to stop us doing this together?
Yeah.
Right. And what are the other priorities you've got on right now that are probably going to get in the way of us actually getting a deal done now?
Yeah.
Right. And asking those difficult questions actually gets the buyer thinking a lot more about the challenges that they're facing and how likely they are to want to fix this specific problem right now.
There's so much around uncovering that pain, and I think every rep knows that they need to do that, but it's how they implement that into that conversation with the buyer, because there's almost this sense of fear of, oh, I've uncovered your pain, but I don't really want to address it. It's similar to how they don't want to bring the CFO into the conversation. But actually, if they can say, and we'll get onto this with the relationship management, you come across as such more of an authentic person. If you're like, hey, Guy, I know that you are struggling with this. Maybe this product isn't right for it, but we can help you in this way. And then they'll be like, wow, this person's actually listened to me.
So I think listening is absolutely key, but be cautious about trying to fix the problem. We've all done it, right? So you jump on a sales call and the customer outlines whatever the problem is that they've got that's perfectly aligned to how the thing that you can solve. And all you want to do is just say, okay, great, sit down, shut up. Let me show you how we're going to fix that problem for you.
I'm going to change your life.
Yeah, exactly, right? We've got it for you. But actually, we need to, fixing the problem is such a small part of that sales cycle.
Yeah.
What we really need to do is go, look, I know I'm going to solve that for you, but and I'll show you the buttons later, okay? But just assume for a minute that I gave you a solution that solved that problem. Now what? What does that mean? Who else in the business do we need to get bought into this before we could get buy-in from it? Is there really a budget for it? What other priorities are going to get in the way? What does your CFO think about this, or other stakeholders, and so on? So showing them the buttons and how we all have to kind of almost bite our tongue because we know we can help these people, but showing them how we can help is kind of the easy bit. We kind of need to pick at the scab a little bit. We need to make the pain a little bit more prominent. We need to really understand, okay, you say it's a problem, but how big of a problem is it? If you don't fix this problem, what's going to happen to your business? Is it going to grow? Is it going to go under? So, I really need to understand, is this a problem you'd really like to fix? But you know what? In the grand scheme of things, it's not the end of the world. Look, our first product was that piece of the puzzle we call relationship intelligence. All right, so no revenue intelligence, no call intelligence, none of the other stuff that we now do. All we were doing is fixing the dirty data in Salesforce. And there must be 250,000 companies in the world using Salesforce, and all of them have a problem with data quality. Okay, and we still struggle to sell. Why? Because the quality and the consistency of the data in Salesforce is a problem for everybody, but it's a 7 out of 10, right? And if anyone out there is only dealing with 7 out of 10s right now, good luck to you, right? Because most of us are putting out fires that are 11 out of 10s.
Yeah.
So just coming to market with a feature, and we see a lot of that. A lot of these point solutions in the sales space are just features. They're not really an end-to-end solution. They're not actually going to solve the problem. If you use them correctly and then yes, it might be the right service for you. But what we found is that you've really got to solve a compelling problem for people to prioritize doing this over and above anything else right now. And for us, quota attainment is that compelling problem. The fact that 4 out of 5 reps are missing quota, that's something we need to fix, and we need to fix it quickly. And more often than not, we can find that budget just by ripping out these point solutions that aren't really moving the bar anyway. So we don't actually need to spend, so sometimes you can actually spend less money and actually achieve the outcome a whole lot quicker.
Yeah, you mentioned budget there, and I know that's going to be one of the main blockers for people when talking about objection handling. They're going to go, don't have enough budget, it's too expensive. And you did do a piece there around what average performers do compared to top performers on offering discounts. You probably don't want to offer a discount too early, do you? Because you're like, okay, yeah, I'll give you whatever you want. But what is that sweet spot of navigating the discount? Because you might have to at some point.
Yeah, look, again, you don't want to let a deal go, right? So velocity is everything. Okay, so for example, if you don't book the next meeting within 7 days of the last meeting taking place, it doesn't actually have to happen within 7 days. But if you haven't booked the meeting within 7 days, your win rate will drop by 65%. Okay, so momentum is everything, and so whatever it takes, you've got to get the momentum going. And actually, when you look at the numbers, getting a deal done every month, even though you might have to give a small discount on some of them just to get them over the line, versus doing 4 deals a year, but you never give away a discount, you can imagine which one's better for you, right? So, and again, once they're on your journey, it depends on what you're selling, of course. But if it's a SaaS business, then you can get them. If you need a discount in the first year, especially if they're paying some sort of setup fees for example, you can get the prices up as you go. So I'm not too. I wouldn't worry too much about the pricing piece of the puzzle, but I think we talk about price far too early in the sales process. What matters is that we have identified, because the cost of doing what you do for a customer is usually the cost of your license or product is a tiny fraction of the real cost of the business actually making that change, right? The cost of change is high. Bringing the right expert advisors in to help with that change, or internal resources that are going to be applied to use that change, or training the whole team on how to use this new feature or new product, that's the real cost to the business. So what matters is that the business case has to stack up. It has to be worthwhile the effort to go through that change. If it's not a 10x return imminently, then you're going to struggle. Yeah. And then really price shouldn't be the biggest challenge. It should be an alignment. And there's always creative ways of doing it. Look, you've only got limited budget this year. Okay, we'll sign a 3-year contract. We'll help you hit the number you need this year. But we've got a journey where we're going together, so that by year 3 I'm back to my rate card. Yeah. Right. So everyone wins.
Yeah. Again, with journey together and working with them, and that's the fourth attribute, which is that relationship management. And you've spoken so well about how you build that relationship as a partnership instead of you are the salesperson and they are the buyer, you are working together. So there's not too much more that I want to touch on about this, but when you're talking about how many people to have a relationship with, you said at the beginning, make sure you are speaking with multiple stakeholders, involve the CFO early on. Do you have a magic number for how many people you should have involved within the sales process, or maybe key personas, CFO being one of them? But it's so important now more than ever when people are moving on from businesses to not just have that one stakeholder, because it could undo all your work.
Yeah, you certainly don't want to be single-threaded. I think the short answer is, you as a customer, you have the data. You know how many stakeholders you should be engaging with. So I mentioned earlier that when we onboard a customer, once we fix that historical data, we're then in a place where we can give our customers what we call our insight report. So we analyse all the data from the last 4 quarters, and we'll show you, when you've got 3 stakeholders involved in the sales process, your win rate might be 15%. And when you've got 6 or more stakeholders, your win rate might be 30%. So now you know that. Now you've got clarity around that. When you're selling to a customer that looks like this, and we have this, and we're multi-threaded to this level, this is the output, this is the win rate. When you turn that into a picture, suddenly the penny drops. And we see time and again, one of the things we guarantee is that as long as you follow the journey, within 3 months we'll double the number of reps hitting quota. So how do we achieve that? How can we quote that? And the answer is by showing sales teams the data from their org as to how multi-threaded they need to be, because it will be different. If you're selling a much more transactional product, you may be able to go single-threaded. You might only need 1 or 2 stakeholders. And if you're selling a solution that's lots of money and very complex, you might need dozens of people in the sales cycle. So there is no one size fits all, but the beauty is your historical data will tell us. And don't rely on what's in Salesforce. That's one of the mistakes a lot of our competitors make. The data in Salesforce is incomplete and inconsistent. We need the AI to take over that piece. And if you can point it at the past, it can fix all of that historical data. So now we know how much we win when we've got this level of engagement with this many stakeholders versus when we have, instead of 3 stakeholders, we have 6.
Yeah.
And it's the same with champions. Knowing the persona that's the right champion for you and the impact that has on win rates is huge. So we had one customer last week, they were selling a DevOps product. When their VP of Operations was their champion, they were 4 times more likely to win. Okay.
Wow.
8% of their opportunities had the VP of Operations as their champion. Now, once we showed it to the sales team in a picture, 3 months later, 23% of their opportunities had that VP of Operations as their champion.
Because it's literally there.
It's just
in
there.
writing.
Because they all want to win.
Yeah.
So unlock the data you've already got, turn it into insights, and then show it to the sales team. They'll understand and help them to understand how to win more.
And that really helps with your 5th point of the deal management, because to manage a deal effectively, it is all about learning and collaborating across your team. If you can we've spoken about AI, we've spoken about how leaders can help coach their team, but it is just showing that data of, right, this is what's worked for this amount of people, so let's emulate that, let's take those learnings and bring it into our own cycle. But would you say that there's anything else, Guy, when we come to the deal management piece that you wanted to add and share with our listeners that we haven't touched on?
Momentum really is key. Okay, so and it's a really good signal that things aren't going well if people start cancelling meetings, not responding to your emails or calls. Then that would suggest the deal's likely to slip. And what we know is that when deals start to slip, the win rates drop. So what matters most is maintaining that momentum, and so, for example, one of the things we analyse is the average number of days you spend in stage and what your conversion rates are for every stage. So first of all, if you've got, one of the things we see a lot of sales organisations make a mistake on is they don't have the right gates and triggers in place between the stages, and so it's not unusual to find that people are skipping stages or moving back and forward on different stages all the time, and that means there's no discipline in place. And so I'd encourage you to think about what gates and triggers there should be to move from one stage to the next, and it should be a waterfall effect. And when you look at the data and it's not a waterfall, and one of the late stages has got more opportunities in it than the earlier stages, there's a problem there.
Yeah.
Okay. So understanding time in stage is really important. Usually there's a really big delta between the average time in stage and the time in stage when we win. Okay, and usually, obviously, when we win, it's usually shorter. So knowing that means that if we've got a 64% conversion rate from stage 2 to 3, and on average we spend 50 days in stage, but when we win, we only spend 20 days in stage. Well, once you get past 20 days, you really want to be asking whether this deal is real or not, or if there's anything we can do to reinvigorate that opportunity. Maybe get one of your C-levels involved, take them out for lunch, buy them a coffee, get a secret shopper to ask them, what's going on here? It doesn't sound like there's actually momentum anymore.
Yeah.
Because the second best outcome is closing the deal off as lost sooner.
Because then you can save time and put your energy into something else.
Exactly.
Guy, this has been so fascinating. Thank you so much. I'm confident. I know that everybody is going to have gained so much value from this. If people would like to download the report, where can they get it? Yeah,
so you're welcome to engage with me directly. Just mention the podcast if you want to reach out to me on LinkedIn. You can also download the B2B benchmark report at ebsta.com. There's a banner at the top of the screen and you can click and download it for free. And I'd welcome any feedback on that as well.
I love it. Great promotion, bringing it there in person with you as well. But Guy, as we finish every episode here on Sales Unfiltered, it's all about high performance, but also just being really honest and open about the fact that there are so many challenges, highs and lows. And as I said, I've interviewed some incredible people on this channel, and it's been really lovely to hear about how we're all linked together from things that might go wrong and the challenges that we experience. So what is one challenge that you faced in your life or career that shaped you to where you are today?
Well, when you asked me about that, I started thinking a lot about the change we've gone through in the business over the last year or so. And I think what's been really fascinating is that is recognise that the team that gets you to the championship is not necessarily the team that's going to help you win the Premier League. Okay, and so it doesn't mean that those players are not just as important and they're not just as valuable, and you can be still be loyal to those individuals. But ultimately, if you're trying to build a team that's going to win the Premier League, you need to sometimes make some tough decisions about those stakeholders, about those players. And so we've gone through a lot of change at the senior level within our business, and you know, there were times during that journey where I was so nervous about making those changes. We probably waited a year too long. And so I think one of the lessons I learned is, and I thought we may not even survive it. Really? And we've now reduced the team by nearly a third, and we had a record May, right? And we've had in fact a record quarter. The business is working so much better now. We've made some of the changes that we knew we should have made a long time ago, but they were difficult, and it was about having difficult conversations with people that I cared for, and now I look back and I think, well, you know, it wasn't such a big deal after all, and actually we're a lot stronger now that we've moved on. So bite the bullet and lean into to working. Listen to what you think you need, and make sure you've got the right team around you to achieve the goals for the next year ahead.
And thank you for sharing that, because I think sometimes people can think that that's almost a failure if you are to downsize and you're moving backwards, but actually you're not. You're just tightening up your team, as you said, to get to that.
I suspect that we'll be a larger team in 12 months than we were 6 months ago.
Really? Yeah.
So it's not that we are reducing the cost base consistently, it's just that we had people in the business that weren't necessarily facing the same direction as everybody else. And there were a number of kind of inefficiencies and egos and challenges that we needed to address, and bringing more people in wasn't going to help that. We needed to cut before we added and grew again. So we've gone through that challenge. We're now growing again, and I wish I'd done it a year earlier.
And I can't wait to see you get to the Premier League.
Exactly.
Who do you support? We have to ask.
I'm a Spurs fan, unfortunately. Yeah.
Well, we will get there. Maybe your football team and Ebsta's team will get to the top.
There we go. Fingers
One
crossed.
day. Thank you so much, Guy, for being on the channel. I've learned a lot today, and hopefully you've enjoyed it as well. And can't wait to see how you guys grow.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Sales Unfiltered. If you enjoyed this conversation, I would love for you to hit the subscribe button. And if you're feeling extra generous, leave us a quick review. See you next week.